Welcome to another episode of Vantage Point by DigiJanus. Today, I am really excited about the episode. And the reason for that is that today's guest is someone I've really looked up to. I've never met him before. This is the first time I'm meeting him. But I've been a big fan of his work. His work gets quoted in every single user journey meeting that we do with any financial institute because they want to build apps, financial banking apps that people keep coming back to. They will say, I want the people to feel that this app is like what Instagram is to my 16-year-old. So without taking any more footage, I want to welcome Nir. Thank you, Nir. Really glad to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And I know the audience wants to listen to you, not me. So why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your journey, and how did you come up with the idea of Hooked?
Sure. So I am a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that get them hooked to healthy habits. So I work primarily in fintech is a big category, educational technologies, health tech is a big one. Any product or service that tries to get people hooked to a repeat behavior that improves the user's lives. So something that people want to do, but for lack of good product design, they don't do. Right. So saving money is a great example, and making the right investment decisions, exercising, eating right, using the right healthcare products, taking care of your weight management, learning a new language. All these behaviors require repeat behavior. If you can't get the user to engage in the product, it won't help the user, and the user will eventually churn. Yeah. So I got started in this industry when I started 2 tech companies, and the last tech company was at the intersection of gaming and advertising. And I had this front row seat back in 2012 when many of these companies were really hitting their stride. Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and these companies were really starting to take off. And I was in Silicon Valley. I was teaching at the time at Stanford Graduate School of Business after I sold my last company. And I had this vantage point to learn from kind of the best in the business. Yeah. And when I wanted to start my next company, I looked around and said, how do you build habits? How do you design habits into a product? And I didn't find a book that taught me how to do that. Yeah. So I decided to write it myself. And so I started talking to my former clients and my friends and people in the Valley and Stanford professor colleagues. And from that, I amalgamated a model that I think is useful enough to be really practical in the application of product design. And so that's I started blogging about it, and then the blog became a class at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and then later at the Hasselplatter Institute of Design, and then that eventually became the book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products.
Absolutely, that is a wonderful journey, and I remember from your book, one instance that you had written. There were people who were selling hundreds and millions of virtual cows, and advertisers struggling to get their outcomes done. So that really stuck with me. That was like the first line I ever read about the book, that really stuck. And when we are talking to the financial industry today, the financial industry is trying to do the same thing. How do people make good investment decisions? How do they save money? And how do they become the preferred platform? Yeah. So one of the things that is like very exciting when any of these discussions is happening is the discussion of painkillers versus vitamins. So, and I think that is a very important decision at the early stage of designing any experience. So why don't you walk us through the thought process and one great example of something that started as a vitamin and then became a painkiller?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a lot in that question, a lot of history there too, because so when I got started on my last tech company, it was founded in 2007, we were working with helping advertisers be inside game experience in the form of what we called at the time virtual goods. And we were kind of laughed at the time because what are these silly virtual items that people are playing with in games? And of course now we don't call them virtual goods anymore. You know what you call them? You call them NFTs.
Exactly.
Right? But at the time it was a joke. It was kind of silly. Why would anybody use this? And of course now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so I think that's a great example of how what I think is the common pedagogy that you only want to build products that are painkillers, meaning when you go to an investor, whether it's a venture capitalist or an internal stakeholder, and you show them, hey, here's the product, here's the feature we should work on, they're going to ask you a question like, well, is this a vitamin or a painkiller?
Yeah.
A vitamin is a nice to have, right? If you forget to take your vitamins on a vacation, no big deal. But if you have a splitting headache, you really want to take that aspirin or Tylenol, whatever your brand of choice, you really want to take that painkiller right now, and you'll pay for it. It's an articulatable need. You can say, I need this right now. So the common knowledge is you don't want to build vitamins, you want to build painkillers. But I would ask, when you think about these world-changing companies over the past few years, when you think about Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Slack even in the enterprise space as well as in the consumer space, many of these products, people didn't know they needed.
Yeah.
Nobody woke up at 2 a.m. before Facebook was around and said, oh my God, I wish I could update my status.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody knew they needed that.
Yeah.
But today, if Facebook or Twitter or TikTok shut down, people have a big problem.
Yeah.
Because the key to what turns a vitamin into a painkiller is, of course, a habit. When you create a habit, it becomes an essential part of a user's life. And so that's the goal of a habit-forming product, is to be this kind of product that is so important, is so helpful, is so useful in their day-to-day life that they want to use the product as opposed to feeling like they have to use the product. And when it comes to financial services, this is incredibly important because the difficulty in building products for fintech is that people really don't want to think about money, right? They want it to be there in case they need to buy something, but they don't want to think about those decisions they need to make today to maximize their benefit in the future, right? So a habit-forming product in fintech needs to be something that people don't dread using because, oh, there's going to be some fear factor. It needs to be something they want to use. And if you can get them to want to use the product, you're going to increase customer lifetime value. The customer is going to get more benefit from that product. And of course, the product becomes more valuable with use.
No, absolutely. And so now let me give you the other side. So this show is also about asking a lot of curveballs. So this is the first one. Absolutely, you start from something which is useful and then it becomes a need. What that has done is it has given...
Well, I would argue it always has to stay a need. If something is not useful, people stop using it.
Okay. So it's where I was coming from is it is because of the pursuit of getting to habit-forming products, the industry has gone from a business model which was like pay and use to a freemium business model. You look at Candy Crush, you look at Evernote, 2 examples, which has been shared quite a bit when it comes to the hooked model. So do you feel that the next generation of entrepreneurs who are building these habit-forming products, now they are burning investor cash, like we see all the time. So now that the money is not going to flow in as it was flowing in, do you see that they will need to change big time from how they are building habit-forming products today versus what they need to do in future?
I would argue that the people who are burning cash needlessly are not burning that money on engagement. They're burning it on growth. And that's the big mistake. They're called leaky bucket businesses. And I get a call every week from a venture capitalist who says, we just poured a bunch of money in a company and we were super excited because the growth looked amazing. And then we invest in the company and lo and behold, people aren't sticking with the product. And that's what's called a leaky bucket, right? Users come in, users leak out. So I'm the plumber. I come to block up the leaks, right? And so where people are spending money, where are they bleeding cash? They're bleeding cash many times before they have product market fit, before they have a product that can retain the users. Because throwing good money after bad by acquiring users, right, growth at all costs, that's to blame. If you can't keep your users, if you don't have a critical threshold of people who are habituated to your product, stop. Don't move forward. Don't spend money on advertising. But what people many times do is they'll give money to grow the product. Well, you can pay to grow your user base. Pay Google, pay Facebook, pay YouTube. You can pay to acquire users. You cannot buy engagement. You can buy growth. You can't buy engagement. Engagement must be built into the product. And it's just as important in enterprise products as consumer web products. With SaaS products, even though the business model is very different, even though it's a monthly model, because of the consumerization of IT, if you can't get people to use that product, they're going to churn. And in a SaaS business, that's death.
Yep.
You have to get them to keep using it. So habits become even more important in a SaaS context.
And when money is going to get tight. The reason I was smiling, and the audience wouldn't see this because, the focus will be on you. this is exactly like whenever we talk about, Vantage Point or DigiJanus, and, I send to somebody and they're like, how many impressions are we going to get? I'm like, 300 to 400,000, which is the impressions we get. And they're like, oh, I can get that by, spending like 10 grand. I'm like, but look at the engagement.
Right.
To get this level of comments and engagement and people reaching out to you, you will have to spend at least twice that amount of money.
Right.
And it is, in some context, people get it. And, they're like, yeah. And in some other context, people just don't get it. Then that, getting engagement from a paid media is so damn difficult. People just don't engage with ads. They want to engage with people and content, etc.
Right.
So
there's that phrase, if content is king, engagement is God.
I will use that somewhere.
But it's even more important, right? Because think about it, right? Like if you have a 1% conversion rate on a huge user base, that's nowhere near as good as a smaller user base, but 10, 20, 30% engagement where the user does actually convert to a sale or does come back. Of course, it's much, much better to have those users. What I think is oftentimes neglected is that companies don't realize how much higher the ROI is for keeping customers. I mean, it's common sense. The ROI is so huge, but because we love these, what we call vanity metrics, right? Look, boss, look how much I grew. Look how many people installed the app. Don't look about the fact they don't use it, right?
No, absolutely. And I have seen this very, very closely. Like banks have done, direct to customer platforms and everybody has celebrated. And I can tell you, I was sitting with the MD and I'm like, well, what happened? You were not very happy. And he's like, the amount of trades we get from an entire month on this platform is less than what one of my RM puts in one day. And I get it, and there are multiple reasons for it. However, my follow-up question to you is slightly different. What is happening is with this pursuit of habit building apps, and fintechs are pursuing this, rigorously. There are banks who are getting disrupted or they're losing customer base. If today you are in a business where somebody is approaching it from a freemium or a habit building mindset, it is a very different mindset, right? Like you can see fintechs in Singapore, they offer $0 trades, whereas legacy brokers are offering like $25 minimum trade, etc. What can a bank or a financial institution do when their business get hit by like somebody who's pursuing a freemium or a habit building journey?
Respond by building the kind of product that is habit forming itself. So there's three pillars to every successful business, and this isn't a model I created. I think Reid Hoffman put this to paper, but essentially the GEM framework that every business needs: growth, engagement, monetization. Every startup, that is, growth, engagement, monetization. So a validated business, the way you go from a startup to a validated business model is that you have all three. So startups usually have two of the three and a plan for the third. So growth, we talked about earlier, right? Back up the truck, acquire users one way or another. And can you do that in a way where lifetime value is higher than the cost of acquisition? So that's growth. Engagement is what I work on, right? Engagement is my territory around if we have these users, how do we keep them coming back? And then finally, monetization is, can we make this trade profitable for everyone? So just because there's a new monetization scheme doesn't mean it's sustainable, right? We're seeing that with Robinhood, right? Free trades. And actually, I saw Robinhood super early. I was in a cafe in Palo Alto, and one of the founders of Robinhood walks in and he says, "Oh, I think I've been reading your blog. Are you Nir Eyal?" I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And he shows me this presentation of a slide deck. He's like, "I really got to show you my hook model. Look what I built. You were reading your book." And he says, look. And the product was called Cash Cat. And it had this awful logo of this fat cat, like a Cheshire cat with a cigar and a top hat. It was ridiculous. And then they changed the name to Robinhood later on. And I didn't invest. I could have invested super early. And it was probably a very bad financial decision that I didn't invest. But looking back, I never was comfortable with this. What is it? Order flow, cash for order flow, with the way they make the business model. I never really understood how they really make money. And I to be honest, I still don't 100% understand it, but I know I don't really like it.
And the regulators in Europe, EU will tell you that they don't like it either.
They don't like it either, right? It never smelled, something about it smelled fishy. The benefit to the consumer, I love. Free trades is great, but it never was, something about it was a little fishy to me. me.
And these days I'm sitting with a lot of fintechs in the investment and trading space, and I'm sitting across the table and they're like, oh, we are free trades. I'm like,
But how?
wow, how?
Somebody's going to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Blockchain, somebody's going to figure it out. But at least the Robin, what is it called? Something for order flow. The model of how they make money.
Oh, so basically they sell the order flow to the sell side.
Right.
So that is how they make money. I am not an expert in it, but what I do know is you can only do it in the US. You can't do it in EU at all. It is bad.
Yeah.
So that is how, but that is being looked at as well when, they look at the, in the US also I think the regulator is looking at whether that should be allowed or not allowed.
Yeah. Also because the incentive scheme is that the more the customer trades, the more money they make, which that's something we really do have to think about when it comes to building habits.
Robinhood is one of the examples. I have a few curveballs on to discuss later in the show. And absolutely, when you say that they have to get into the hooked mindset and build these apps, and that is where the banks are headed to. Now, why don't you walk us through the TIVA model? I call it the TIVA model. I don't know, it was.
Sure, that's a good way to remember it. Yeah. So or Atari. Some people call it Atari because it's a hook has a trigger, an action, a reward, and investment. So TARI.
Yeah. Why don't you walk us through the model and like a brief thought process around it?
Sure. So the hook model is a design pattern. It's an experience to connect the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. So the hook has 4 parts, and the hook model starts with a trigger. A trigger has there are 2 kinds of triggers. We have external triggers, and those are all the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that tells the user what to do next with some piece of information. So some kind of call to action. We'll talk about the internal trigger, the other kind of trigger, in a minute. The action is the second step of the hook, and the action phase is where the user does the simplest thing in anticipation of a reward. Open the app, scroll a feed, click a play button, any simple action done to get to the next phase of the hook, which is the reward phase. And not just a reward, it has to be a variable reward, some kind of uncertainty, some kind of mystery involved with what the user might find the next time they engage with the product. And then finally, the investment phase, where the user puts effort into the product for 2 reasons. Number 1, to store value. This is a really big deal. The product needs to appreciate with use, and to load the next trigger to bring them back because of something that they themselves did. So that through successive cycles through these hook models, we start to build an association with what's called an internal trigger. An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state. Loneliness, boredom, fatigue, stress, anxiety, uncertainty, these uncomfortable sensations that when we experience, we look for relief with some kind of product and service. So the ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is that the user uses the product not because of a ping and ding, but because of some kind of internal emotional state. So when I worry, when I have financial insecurity, where do I go? When I fear that I won't be able to buy something in particular, when the stock market's going crazy and I'm uncertain, where do I go to for relief? And if you can become the product that people turn to with little or no conscious thought out of habit, that's a huge moat of defensibility, because once you build a habit with a product, you don't even give the competition a chance. And it's a wonderful way to change consumer behavior by putting them on a path that benefits not only the company, but of course your end user as well.
Thank you so much and for that answer. One of the things you've mentioned and we've been talking about is triggers, as you mentioned, and we'll go step by step into this. Now, how does a financial institution or a bank who's starting today and they've gotten hit by a fintech, they're starting today, where do they even start on building a hook model, starting with triggers, let's say?
So the most important trigger to focus on is the internal trigger, because we know studies find that only 10% of the reason we check our phones, and this is mobile centric, but to answer the question, 10% of the time that we check our phones is because of an external trigger. And there are various types of external triggers, paid, that's a deeper subject. But when it comes to where the other 90% of the time that we check our phones, where does that come from? What is that trigger? If it's not outside of us, it's inside of us. The internal triggers account for 90%. So this is something that I would say all of my clients don't think about until I work with them, which is, what is the emotional itch, right? When they tell me about all the amazing features and benefits of the product, we can do this technically and look at this amazing artificial intelligence and machine learning. But when I say, what's the emotional itch? What's the psychological reason that I would use this product? The engineers have no clue.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at consumer psychology. We have to understand what is it on an emotional basis that brings me to use this product? Meaning, what is the pain point? Okay, what is that emotional itch? And if you can't name it, you can't build for it. So that's the most important place to start. What is that frequently occurring uncomfortable sensation that our product will satiate for the consumer?
Absolutely. And when I was thinking about this, and I have been in discussions where banks are literally building something for relationships manager that they don't want. Because
For an internal product?
Yeah, internal
Oh
product.
my God, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
So how does somebody manage a product like that? Because these relationship managers know if they use this product, all the data is getting in, their relationships are becoming diluted, etc. So they don't want this product. The bank wants this product.
Right.
How do you go, like even start in a dynamic like this to build a habit forming product?
Yeah.
Or is it even possible?
It's very possible. And I think now it's more than ever critical. I get calls every few weeks from companies that are telling me that now it's become an employee retention issue, that people are quitting or not joining because they don't want to use the company's crappy software.
Yeah.
Because they're saying, I can go work at a job where I don't have to suffer through this terrible experience all day of using your terribly built software that is such a pain to use. I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
It makes me happier to go use some other software. And so it's now become an employee retention issue. And it used to be that enterprise software was pushed top down. That whatever software management wanted, everybody had to use. But now with the consumerization of IT, people expect Apple-like products. They want the kind of products and services that are easy to use and built for habits. And so it's more important than ever. And so how you do that is you think about the keystone habits. You think about what's the first hook that I can build with my user in their life, whether it's internal to the company, whether it's external, whether it's enterprise, consumer, it doesn't matter. Right. If it's a frequently used product that you want to build a habit around, you have to start with what is that keystone habit. So you start with something simple. You start with something lightweight. Again, the definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. So first we start with the simple keystone habit, build those 4 steps of the hook model, and then increase in complexity. I mean, think about, like a product like TikTok or Facebook or any social network. First, you start with just consuming content. Just get the habit of a scroll. That's it. They just want you to get in the habit of the scroll. Then once you get into the habit of the scroll, then they can add, okay, we can do, events, and we can do payments, and we can do posting, and we can do commenting, and we can do sharing, all this increase in complexity. But what most enterprise products do is they dump everything on the consumer all at once and say, here, do all this, as opposed to staging it into increasing, it's called progressive disclosure. So starting with one habit and then building a hook on top of a hook on top of a hook with increasing levels of complexity.
And, I can tell you I've been in at least 200 meetings in last 2 years on user journeys. Not one had this progressive thought process or, progressive disclosure thought process. They will say, we ask one question and then second and then third and then fourth. That is again, throwing everything at the user or the RM together.
Right.
Rather. So I think that is absolutely the big difference on how enterprise software is being done and how those approaching this from a hook mindset do it differently. Now, once you have done that, could you walk us through an example of any engagement that you did where they did not have any idea about an internal trigger and they were focusing on external trigger, ads, pings, etc. and stuff, and then you guys had this discussion, they changed course and had great results. So any example on those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think of one off the top of my head where I worked with a company in the language learning space that's now become very, very successful. And they thought that the internal trigger at first, they had an engagement challenge, right? People would sign up, but they wouldn't use the app. And they thought that the internal trigger was, I want to learn a language. Like I came to them and said, okay, what's your internal trigger? I want to learn a language. Why? Well, because I need to pass a TOEFL or because I need to get a job. And I didn't believe them because yes, that is a desire, but it's not a desire that would push someone to do a habitual behavior. It's a short-term habit, right? I need to pass a TOEFL, study, and then I never want to touch the app again, right? But that's not what they were building for. Their business model depended on long-term engagement. They want people to work on studying language for the rest of their life. That their customer lifetime value depended on long-term engagement, not cram for a month to pass a test. So what we looked at instead was a different internal trigger. I said, what if the internal trigger was boredom? What would that look like? Like, what kind of user might want to check a language learning app on the bus, on the way to work, or whatever in their day, instead of watching a YouTube video? Are there users out there that actually could scratch the itch of boredom, not by watching sports, not by, reading a trashy web page, but looking at something that enriches their life? Maybe. Okay. Well, what would that hook look like if we built a product around that internal trigger? And it turned out that's the internal they still use today. They built a product that is almost entertainment for the consumer, and now they're a publicly traded, doing very well company.
Oh, absolutely. That is a great example. And I think getting that internal motivation out is very, very challenging. We have done a similar exercise for not only the thought leaders, but also the user base of DigiJanus. We are a passion project. And I can tell you, we have done it wrong more often, and maybe our current iteration also maybe. But it is very challenging to get that. How do you even get to something like that? That is my big question to you. How do you get to somebody's internal trigger?
Yeah.
And how do you generalize it for a bigger audience, right?
There's a few different ways. One is you can look at nascent behaviors. You can look at, is there a group of weirdos that are going through a lot of hoops to do something, that if we could simplify, if we could make it easier, there might be an underserved market of weirdos out there like them.
Yeah.
So for example, are there people who enjoy studying language, right? Yeah, they're called autodidacts, right? They're people who teach themselves a language. Well, what's the process they use? Why do they teach themselves a language? It's not because they need to pass a test. It's because they enjoy it.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from those, the fringe weirdos that if we built a better product, everyone might do that behavior too, or a lot more people might do that behavior. So that's one. Another technique comes from the Toyota production system, which is called the 5 whys technique, which is when you are designing a product, you're asking yourself and your team why the user would do that behavior. Okay, so email. Why would I send an email? Well, because I want to communicate. Why? Well, because I need to get messages across. Okay, but why? And you keep asking whys at least 5 times until you get to a negative emotion.
Yeah.
When you get to the negative emotion, now your aperture is much wider. It's not, oh, I need a product that helps me do this one little thing. That's a feature. That's not a company.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
When you widen the aperture, now you can say, oh, you know what? The problem is workplace uncertainty. Well, now with a wide aperture like that, when you stop to think about the psychological state the user is in, now there's lots of solutions that might solve the problem. It's not just, oh, let's stick with the thing we've already built. It's let's zoom out and say, well, maybe there's other ways that we might be able to scratch that psychological itch.
Oh, okay. And that is how you get started on this. Okay. Once, somebody has figured out the trigger, they've implemented it, then, there can be internal and external triggers. Externals are, those paid and all of those different things. You get tagged on a picture, somebody tags you in a LinkedIn post, etc. And that keeps building on and, you move forward. Now comes the action phase. Now, this is everything up until this point is built towards driving an action. Mm-hmm. So walk us through a few examples of where you have seen something like really good, which has exceeded your expectations. So a trigger that led to actions which were even better than what you had imagined.
So actions are always, they're defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. So they're all about simplicity. And it turns out that the first rule of interaction design is the easier a behavior is to do, the more people do it. Okay, and so there's these factors. It's common sense, but it's incredible how many times people don't think about this in product design, right? For example, you were saying before, we need you to answer 32 questions, and we need your social security number, and we need your blood type, and we need your date of birth, and we need your mother's maiden name. All this stuff we ask of people that keeps them from doing the behavior we want them to do.
Yeah.
And that keeps them from doing the habit. So you want to ask for that information. I understand. We have compliance, we have this, we have that. We got to ask for the information. Fine. But you do it after the reward. So the action is the simplest thing done in anticipation to get the reward. After the user gets the reward, then they reciprocate by giving us data.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not that you can't have what you need as a company. You just need it in a different order. But for the action phase, it needs to be the simplest thing done in anticipation of reward. So thinking about what is that psychological itch, right? Back to that internal trigger.
Yeah.
What's the easiest thing that I as a user can do to get relief from that discomfort, to get as quickly as possible to the reward? So in the financial services space, If you think about when mint.com has been around forever, it's not very good, right? Like it's not the best designed product out there. But what it does really well is after you've onboarding is hell. But if you have onboarded, it gives you this very quick relief from the discomfort of, do I have enough money, right? What's my portfolio doing? This fear, this uncertainty around what's happening with my net worth is very easily solved by opening the app. The habitual action is open the app once a day. See what's happening with my net worth. That's really what it's about. Yeah. And so, and people will keep using the product even though there's been a million competitors. No one's really been able to give Mint a good fight because that habit is so solidified. Even if there's better products out there, wow, it's really hard to switch because it's so easy to get relief from that psychological discomfort.
No, and absolutely. And I'll share a secret with you. So DigiJanus is 5 episodes. Season 1 was 5 episodes. We were seeing, so when we started, I said, okay, we looked at the closest similar platform, and they get around 80 to 100 people registered. So when I had to commit to members, the guests who were coming in. So I said, okay, I'll commit to 100, even if I have to run ads. The first episode, we got 550 registrations. And I was very taken aback. But there was one thing that we did deliberately by design. If you go through any webinar experience today, you have to go through 10 steps. You put your email, this, and then you will get spammed like hell. So that is I call it the negative reward of, stuff. With us, you are at that one click away. You just press that one click, nobody spams you. And what has happened is, over a period of time, people start trusting you.
Totally.
And then they get back. I don't know if I unconsciously use the hook model.
I'm glad you did. I mean, trust is a huge factor, right? Yeah. So trust or a lack of trust erects friction between what the user wants and what you want them to do.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And I think that everybody talks about reducing friction and reducing the number of clicks. But what they're not looking at is, once they've done that, if they sign up in one click using Gmail, and then you throw them a 30-page questionnaire.
That's why they don't,
exactly. That breaks the trust. That is even worse than friction. So I think, what you just mentioned is not only reducing friction, but building trust is also very, very important. And what Mint does, it gives value immediately after a rather frictionful onboarding, right? So that is very, very interesting. What are the 3 or 4 common mistakes you see when you're working with clients or, especially fintechs?
So the biggest mistake is not considering consumer psychology in the first place. So many times behavioral design doesn't have a seat at the table. That people in fintech either come from the finance world or they come from the engineering world, right? And many times they're not coming from the product design sphere. They're certainly not coming from the psychology department, right? And that's a big mistake because many people think, well, we have a great idea, or my boss has a great idea, or my investors have a great idea, and we'll just build whatever they say we should build. Yeah. But that almost always ends in disaster because if you're not only talking to your customers, which most companies today have figured out, right? Everybody read Lean Startup and we know about customer development. But the problem that many companies have is that they have a million ideas, right? They have a backlog of all kinds of ideas and no way to prioritize.
Yes.
So when it comes to, well, what do we build first? It's, let's ask the hippo. You know who the hippo is? The highest paid person's opinion, right? But who says the hippo knows what they're talking about? Many times they have no clue. Let's build what the investors say we should build. That's terrible. The investors don't, that's the last person you want to ask. Even asking the customer what we should build is actually fraught with risk as well, because there are all kinds of things customers will tell you they want, and then you build it for them and they don't use it.
And their needs change.
Or their needs change, right? So as opposed to doing any of these outdated techniques, what I recommend is that we look to some kind of model. We look to consumer psychology to help us build the right thing sooner. Because the sooner we build the right thing, the less blood, sweat, tears, and money we have to waste on building the wrong stuff.
Yep.
So that's the biggest mistake, is not using some kind of model based on psychology research. And so that's what I'm offering is, you still have to build, measure, learn. You're still going to have failures. Most of your experiments are going to be failures. If they're not, you're not testing enough. But this tool, this model you can use through the hook model, you can run your product ideas, you can run the features through this model and say, well, where is our hook deficient, right? We've got this backlog of features, but is that feature serving the hook model? If not, don't do it.
Yeah.
Or if it's serving a part of your hook model that's already great, why are you wasting your time? Build only the features that improve your hook model, that increase user retention.
Absolutely. And I have to agree, that in the experiences I've had, usually how product decisions are driven is like, this is the biggest business unit. They think this will help with the customers.
The loudest person.
Yeah.
Right?
So they win. And what happens is, I've seen this firsthand, like I think like 3 or 4 times. What happens is, they go out there, they build something, and the customer journey has changed. Customers' preferences have changed, etc. Ask all the banks who build like very swanky branches during, like just before COVID. They closed them down thinking these guys will never return, and now the customers want to go back in the branches. They want an omni-channel experience. So I think, that is a very, very good point. Now, we'll jump into the next part, because on all 3 of these, I have a very big curveball waiting for you.
Sure.
So variable reward is what is considered the holy grail of hook, because there are so many behavioral models, but variable reward is where the hook model is very different from some of the other models that people have looked at. So walk us through the variable reward model, and then I have some curveballs for you.
Yeah. So most models of habit formation advise some kind of reward, but I would argue that for products, and that's what the hook model is really for. It's not for personal habits. It's for product habits. You've got to have a variable reward. What is a variable reward? A variable reward is what's called an intermittent reinforcement. And so this was studied back in the 1950s by B.F. Skinner. And Skinner found that when he gave a food pellet, the reward to his pigeons, who were hungry, by the way, the hunger was the internal trigger. If the pigeons weren't hungry, they wouldn't ask for the reward. But if the pigeon was hungry, they would peck at a disc and receive a little food pellet. By the way, if our customers aren't hungry, right? If we don't identify an internal trigger in our customers, we also can't make them do what we want. This isn't mind control, right? But if the user has that itch, if they have this psychological need, as we talked about a lot, then you can propose a variable reward, where what Skinner found with these pigeons, that if they were hungry, they would peck at the disc and get a reward if there was variability there. So if sometimes a pigeon would peck at the disc, nothing would come out. The next time they pecked at the disc, they would receive a reward. The rate of response, the number of times a pigeon pecked at the disc, increased when the reward is given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So we see variable rewards in all sorts of habit-forming products, online, offline. You see them everywhere. Sports, right? Why do we like watching sports on TV? Well, it's variability, right? Where's the ball or puck going to go? There's uncertainty there. News, the first 3 letters of news, NEW. What's new? What's different? Nobody wants yesterday's news. They want to know what they don't know, the surprise. Movies, books, romance, all these things depend upon variability to keep us engaged. So when we design habit-forming products, especially in fintech, it's actually easy because the key variable reward in almost all fintech products is your bank account, right? The stock market. If you think about day trading is a wonderful way to lose money. Most people should not be day trading. It's a terrible idea. But many people do. Why? Because it's a slot machine, right? It's gambling. And it's gambling because of variability. That's why we like it. And so it's not that variable rewards are good or bad. It's a tool, like a hammer, that can be used constructively.
For good or bad,
Exactly. So when we design a habit-forming product, we need to know that variable reward is the engine, so to speak, of that hook model. And so we need to understand that it needs to be designed based on these 3 types of variable rewards. We have rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. And you need at least one of those 3. The best habit-forming products actually have all 3. That's not a requirement, but you need to have at least one of those 3.
So the first question is, which one do you prioritize if you can prioritize?
Tribe. So tribe is the most long-lasting of the 3 types of rewards. The worst is rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt are rewards like material possessions, discounts. Those are the hunting for these type of money. And the reason that those are the worst is because you train users to expect them. And you tend to attract the cheapskates, right? But this is what most brands do. They say, oh, how do we get people engaged? Give them discounts, give them offers. And it is a form of variable reward, and it can be very engaging. The question is, is that the type of consumer you want? Do you want the cheapskates? Because that might not be the case. And it's something you have to use very, very sparingly. And it comes right out of your bottom line, right? If you give someone a coupon, that's from your profits, as opposed to information rewards, as opposed to social rewards. Social rewards are the best because when people come for some kind of community, there's no direct cost to you, right? You just have to establish that framework, that meeting place for people to interact with each other. And of course, they're going to interact around your brand. And the result of that engagement is oftentimes monetization.
And this is where my question on Robinhood comes to you. Now, a lot of times, Robinhood had this model, you sign up, you get like this free stock. A lot of companies copied that, built out models on that, and they will be like, I have personally seen these ads. You sign up an account, you get like an Apple share, you get a fractional Tesla share, etc. and stuff. You sign up, you put in some money, they give you some actions to do. You put like X $1,000, etc., etc. You do some actions, then they throw more rewards at you, more coins. How do you balance this? Because I have seen apps which could have been great apps, but I don't want to use them because it is overwhelming, the number of triggers, the responses, etc. that need to. How do you draw a balance?
So generally, these offers are enticements to get people onboarded.
Yeah.
So that's, remember we talked about growth, engagement, monetization. That's a growth strategy because it happens once, right? So saying, hey, sign up and we'll give you some free stock or we'll give you $100 or whatever, that's one time. So that's got nothing to do with engagement. That has to do with growth. That's a growth strategy to get over the friction of onboarding. So that can be profitable. And of course, every credit card company makes this calculation of, is that, just part of cost of acquisition, and is the lifetime value of the customer high enough to cover that cost of acquisition? And, many times it is, because people tend, once they have a financial services product, they don't tend to leave because it's very hard to leave, right? There's a lot of friction to leaving. We call these type of companies roach motels. People come in, they can't come out, which is slightly unethical, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But then in terms of how you balance the rewards, it's kind of related to what I said earlier around, if your core reward mechanic, if your variable reward is always financial, you will attract the kind of people who are looking for financial rewards, which are monetary rewards, as opposed to if you do rewards of the tribe, rewards of the self, and information rewards as classified by rewards of the hunt. It don't cost you anything. That's about good design. You don't have to pay to bring people back. You can make the product engaging because they want to come back.
Great answer. I want to dive a little deeper in that. Because what has happened is there are apps you download, and I'm talking specifically about Fintechs app. And there are too many triggers.
Too many notifications.
Too many notifications.
Yeah, but not necessarily rewards.
I'll tell you, I'll walk you through the journey. So I signed up, saw a free Apple share. I signed up. I'm like, okay, looking for a trading app. This looks like a great app.
Yeah.
So their growth strategy worked very well. That Apple hook was great. Came into the app. Now they're like, if you do this, if you read one article, then you will get this. If you read, you invite 2 friends, you will get $60 more. If you do this, etc., etc. So within the first 2 days of being on the app, they send me those triggers, let's call them notifications or triggers, like 5 or 6 different types of triggers, which required me to do actions, which were small in particular, but together that was a lot of effort.
Right. Which eventually 2 things are going to happen, right? Well, 3 things could potentially happen. What the company is hoping is that you come back enough times to build a habit on itself.
Yeah.
That's a small number of people. What more oftentimes happen is people turn off your notifications, and the phone OS makers have made it easier than ever, right? Apple and Google have made it easier than ever to just say, stop sending these stupid notifications, which is what I do with almost all these apps.
Yeah.
Or people become blind to notifications. When they have so many notifications, they just ignore all of them. And so we need to be very, very careful with that kind of stuff. And so how do you, I think your question is, how do you send good notifications?
How do you make a balance, right?
So it's about one word. The difference between a notification that feels like spam and a notification that feels like magic is context. Okay, context. And this is why it's so important. I know I've talked about it a lot, why it's so important to understand your internal trigger. And I'll illustrate this with a quick story. I was on a long haul flight, and I was sitting in the aisle seat, and there was a guy in the aisle seat across from me, okay? And this guy was asleep. very clearly. He had a pillow. He was clearly passed out. And the flight attendant comes down the aisle, and she stops, and she looks at him, and she says, "Sir." And he's asleep. He doesn't say anything. So he says it louder. He says, "Sir." Again, he's passed out. Now people are starting to look at her. She says it a third time, loud. She says, "Sir." And he says, what is it?" And she says, "Sir, what would you like to drink?" It sounds ridiculous, right? How rude. Did he want to drink? Yes, he wanted a drink, but when he was thirsty, not when he was sleeping.
Yes.
So this is exactly what we're doing. We're doing this in the industry right now to our users by sending them notifications on our schedule.
Right.
Please check. Why? For me, not for the user, but for the company. Invite friends. Why? Why does inviting users benefit me? It doesn't make the product better. I don't want this stupid, $5 incentive. How does it make the app better to invite other people?
Yeah.
So we are constantly sending notifications on our schedule when it's convenient for us, as opposed to considering when is the user feeling the internal trigger.
Yeah.
So the closer together you can couple the external trigger with the minute the user feels the itch, that's when it's magic. That's when it's magic. So when you feel stressed, anxious, uncertain, fatigued, whatever the case, that's when you want to send the external trigger. Not just willy-nilly when it's convenient for you to send it, but when you think, where is the user in time and place? And we have this data, by the way.
Yeah.
The users are very willing, if the product gets better by giving us this data, they're happy to tell us, like, here's my the calendar access data, location data, there's a million customer preference data. People can tell us things about them that will help us send better notifications that are more likely to be responded to.
No, absolutely. And there is some common sense as well, right? And, but let me tell you, the example you take, that is very common. In fact, I was traveling on SQ. One of the things they let you do now is, if you don't want a mail, you can let them know. They'll put like a small tag and nobody will wake you up. And I have used that so many
They don't do
times.
that on the American Airlines.
Okay. Yes.
I wish they would.
Yeah, but that is exactly like, how can you be more considerate towards that?
Right. The problem is if you don't think about that in advance and you burn people out, then they turn on that do not disturb permanently. They just say, don't allow any notifications from this company. They unsubscribe. And now we have very little, then we burn that bridge. It's very hard to get them to turn it back on.
Absolutely. And I think the variable reward is one of the most delicate parts of this whole process, because, you do too many of these, then it is not variable. You do too many similar.
And it's not useful. I think the biggest mistake is that you have to think to yourself, again, back to the internal trigger. That's why it's the first step of the hook model. If you don't understand the internal trigger, you don't know what variable rewards to send, right? So the variable reward has to scratch the user's itch. So if the variable reward, if the internal trigger is boredom, well, then the variable reward has to entertain. If the internal trigger is loneliness, well, we have to connect people together. If the internal trigger is uncertainty, we have to give people assurance. So the problem is that companies don't realize what psychological itch they're building for, so they send all kinds of notifications. Maybe you'll respond to this, maybe you'll respond to that, as opposed to thinking, wait, what is the internal trigger? What are we scratching here? What's the itch? And only when you know the itch, then you can send appropriate notifications, then you can offer appropriate variable rewards.
Okay, and I've read through the book, you look at all these social media platforms and you try to, get to what the internal trigger would be or internal itch would be. What do you think is the internal itch for somebody who is very active on LinkedIn?
For LinkedIn?
Yeah.
For LinkedIn, it used to be about job hunting. It's no longer. It hasn't been for years. LinkedIn is a content site. It's what you do when you're bored at work.
Yeah.
Right? It's a reasonable way to catch up on company news, on industry information. It's a feed. It's a news feed.
Yeah. But I have a different theory on that. I'll say, I think a lot of people don't get recognized for the work they do at their workplace. So they want to have LinkedIn as a platform to get recognized for that. So I feel we will edit that out.
Seeking connection.
Yeah, seeking connection.
So all social media has a portion of seeking connection. For sure.
Yeah. Editor will cut that out. Our audience doesn't want to hear that.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think it's reality. Many times that's our opportunity, right? If you're missing, this is called the needs displacement hypothesis, that if you are missing a psychological nutrient, so to speak, if you're missing something in one area of your life, you look for it somewhere else. I mean, this is, you asked earlier, like, how do I make my product as habit forming as TikTok for my 16-year-old? You know why your 16-year-old is overusing TikTok?
Yeah.
Because they're missing stuff in the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's why kids overuse. They're not getting enough of something in the real world, so they look for it online.
No, absolutely.
And so adults do it too.
Yeah, and we can talk about LinkedIn, and I've thought about this many times. It is one of the most used app on my phone, and I think about it as well. Now, after all of this is done, one of the really important parts is investment, because that is what you will make the user come back again and again and again. So, walk us through, how do you think about this when you're designing experience for let's say a fintech or an app, etc. How do you think about the investment?
So the investment phase in fintech, people think it's investing money. It can be, but that's actually later on, right? Because investing money it takes a lot of friction, a lot of cognitive load, a lot of thought to do I trust this place? Will I put in my money? So before that, there's other forms of investment: data, content, reputation, skill acquisition. There's lots of things that users do to put value into the product to make it better with use. And this is probably the most overlooked of the 4 steps of the hook model. And it's the most revolutionary. If you think about where manufacturing has come over the past 150 years, Henry Ford used to say that you could have any color of Model T as long as it's black. Yeah. Why did he say that? Or supposedly said it? Well, because retooling his factory to give you a blue car and you a yellow car and you a red car was really hard back then.
Yeah.
Well, today, companies can tailor their products and services to their customers in real time.
Yeah.
So if you were to log in to my social media account, or to my Mint account, or to my workout app, or whatever the case, it wouldn't be interesting to you because it's been tailored to my data, to my use, based on past behaviors. And that's killer. So it's a form of personalization that makes the product better and better with use. And so if you're not doing that, if you're just saying, hey, here's what you came for, goodbye, it's almost like if you went to lunch with a good friend and you had a good conversation, you got vulnerable, here's what's happening in my life, here's what's happening with my kids, here's what's happening at work, oh, my boss is a jerk, blah, blah, blah. You get vulnerable with them, and you tell them all this stuff that's happening in your life. And then a week later, you get together with them again, and they don't remember anything you told them. So either your friend has amnesia and they need medical help, or they're a bad friend.
Yeah.
And so as a company, if you are not remembering what your users are telling you, you're leaving a lot of value on the table. So the key metric we look for is that the product needs to appreciate, as opposed to things in the physical world, right? This chair, your couch, your car. These things depreciate with wear and tear. Habit-forming products do the opposite. They should appreciate. They should get better and better the more we use them, because of this term I coined, stored value. So that's what the investment phase does, is store value. The more it's used, the better it becomes, the harder it is to leave.
So one of the things that get asked to you very often is the morality of something like this. This is powerful stuff, and if you look at the examples that have been done, and and some of the platforms we have talked about, they are very influential platforms now.
Yes.
And you have addressed this in the book. So how would you guide like an exec who is going to take this decision on the morality of making these decisions? So
there's a few different lenses we can use about ethics, but I think the best to look at this from a holistic perspective is to consider that manipulation is not necessarily a bad thing. It has a negative connotation, but manipulation is not always bad, because there are 2 kinds of manipulation. There's what we call persuasion, which is helping people do things that they themselves want to do. And then there's coercion. Coercion is getting people to do things they don't want to do. The difference between persuasion and coercion is regret. So I propose that companies pass the regret test. The regret test says that we never build a product that the user would regret using, knowing everything we as the designer knows. And we can actually test this just in the same way that we would do usability testing. We bring people in, a representative sample, it can be 5, 6, 7 people, and we see, we walk them through the user flow. We do this all the time, but we don't ask them this ethical question of, hey, here's what's gonna happen. Would you regret using the product knowing this happens? Now, you almost never have to actually do the regret test. Because if you're sitting around a conference table and people have, I have this idea, and you may worry that it's a dark pattern, that it's one of these unethical, coercive practices, just saying, you don't want to tell your boss, no, boss, that's a bad idea. But what you can do is you can raise your hand and say, you know what? Before we do this, and people say that this is potentially bad on social media, we should run a regret test on this just to make sure that this is not something people will regret. So if it's that spammy offer, if it's putting something sneaky in someone's cart, if it's sending them 100 emails that they don't appreciate, you can test this kind of stuff and say, hey, look, if this happened, let's do it in the lab, do it at the company before you push it to production, and see what percentage of your user base regret doing it. 9 times out of 10, just proposing the regret test has a chilling effect. And you'll say, you know what? We can find a better way to bring people back. And so that's a great, very easy ethical bar to use.
Right. And, you also have a manipulation metrics out there, so, and which is...
That's more for personal decisions. So that's about you, an individual, versus at the company level.
Yeah. And I think it should be called the manipulation check metrics rather than the manipulation metrics. It is a little bit of a misnomer.
What do you mean? Manipulation check?
Because, it helps you check whether you are actually going, down the wrong path.
Manipulation check. Yeah, and it doesn't have alliteration.
Yes.
Authors love alliteration. So.
Absolutely. So, and, that is a great, test. Now that we know about the hook model and, we know how to check whether we're doing the right thing or not, how to look for such opportunities is the big question that we want to ask you now.
Yeah, the best is to look for nascent behaviors. Look for the places where people are doing the behavior currently not very well. So many times I get pitched a lot of companies. I do a lot of angel investing, and many times I will ask an entrepreneur, how are users currently solving this problem? What is the existing habit that people have for this solution that you're proposing for this problem? And many times they'll say, oh, Nir, you don't understand. This is blue ocean, right? Nobody has ever solved this problem before like we have. And they typically think that's a good thing, but more often than not, it's a bad thing. Because what does that say? If there is no existing solution for this problem, more often than not, it means it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And that's a much bigger risk, right? That you're building something that nobody really wants.
Yep.
And so what we want to do instead is to find that existing habit. What's that existing solution? It might be for a small market. It might be an alpha solution. I love it when companies say, oh, let me show you the existing solution. It's Scotch tape and bubble gum. It's a bunch of APIs stitched together. It's Google Docs. Like that's great. That tells me that maybe there is a nascent opportunity there that we can now harness and build a standalone product for. So looking for those existing behaviors that people are suffering through, but nobody's perked up and said, wait a minute, why do I have to suffer through this? Why is this so hard? Why is this so expensive? Why is this so time consuming? Why is there so much friction around this current way of doing it? That's the kind of opportunity you want to look into.
Okay. And, this has been a insight-filled episode that we have had, and, it has been a pleasure. We're getting to the end of the show, and I want to ask you 2 questions. One, you have a new book out there, Indistractable. Why this new book?
Yeah.
What are you, planning to achieve with this, and, the thought process again?
So Hooked is about how to build good habits. Indistractable is about how to break bad habits, specifically these habits around distraction. So Hooked is written for product makers, right? Anybody who touches the product, marketers, entrepreneurs, business folks, anybody who's touching a product experience. Indistractable is for everyone. Anyone who struggles with knowing that they are capable of more. So whether it's, I say I'm going to exercise, but I don't. I say I'm going to save money, but I didn't. I say I'm going to be fully present with my kids, and here I am checking my phone. Whatever the case might be, if for whatever reason you're not doing the things you yourself say you're going to do, as I was, I mean, the book is autobiographical. It talks about the struggle that I had with distraction. I spent 5 years diving into the psychological literature on why do we get distracted? Because I think it's a fascinating question, right? And by the way, it's an age-old question. Plato was asking this very same question 2,500 years before the iPhone, which means the source of our distraction can't be our devices. Yeah. It's a much deeper reason, and a much more interesting and a much more empowering reason that turns out if we know how to do it, we can all become indistractable.
Absolutely. And we ask all our guests this question. If there was one thing you could change in the world today, what would that be?
One thing I would change in the world. Well, I think it's important to know what you can actually affect. And I think if there's one thing I wish I could change is that more people would understand the power of habit forming products for good. I think far too many companies don't use it. The real problem is not that a few social media companies have figured it out. The real problem is that most products out there are awful.
Yeah.
That's one thing I wish more people would do. And I wish on the personal side that all of us would realize that we are far more powerful than our technology. I think a lot of people give way too much power to things outside themselves. Oh, it's, my life is the way it is because of all these external factors. And it turns out there's a lot we can do to empower ourselves if we so choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I will send this clip to my father because he'll agree, he has this very nice saying, every time something goes wrong, even if you have like 99 reasons to blame somebody else, find the one reason that you can change yourself, So yeah.
That's all we can control. At the end of the day, I can't affect, the war 3,000 miles away. I can't really affect the stock market. I can't really affect a lot of the things in the world. I can't affect the fact that there's all these engaging products that I want. I can't affect the fact that there's all this delicious food out there that I want to eat all the time. I can't change that. Yeah. All I can change is how I respond to these things in the world.
I am going to get lectured a lot because of this, similarity between you and it.
It's an autobiographical journey. Again, like I wrote the book for myself because I was struggling with distraction in many ways.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you on the show, and thank you for making time. And we wish you the best. I have read Hook, I think 6 or 7 times.
I appreciate that.
You see the condition my book is in. And I will definitely Indistractable is next on my list. So thank you so much. And, we really loved having you on the show.
Thank you.
We wish you the best.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.